Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I am so honored to be sharing with you one of the projects that we have been working on over the course of the term. Interestingly enough, I found out not too long ago that there was a radio station, actually two radio stations here on campus. Unfortunately, the Nightly News Media Club, as our home of student broadcasting, looked high and low for more information about this radio station so we could kind of preserve some of that history. Unfortunately, what we found was there wasn't a whole lot of information about it. So what we decided to do is we reached out to some alumni who were a part of one of the stations, and we're going to basically just sit down and do a little bit of an oral history as part of a story that we're working on later this term. First, I would like to introduce our Nightly News co-president, Dylan Bowman. Dylan, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be back, Paul.
And, it's our pleasure. And Dylan, thank you so much for taking the lead on this project. This is something that not only is going to be helpful for you in your own portfolio, but I really think is going to mean something to the institution moving forward.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to uncovering this story.
And also our guest of honor today, we are pleased to be joined by Craig Fahnestock. Craig was a mass media major here at Central Penn College from 1990 to 1992. Craig, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and I hope that I can share some good stories with you.
So one of the things that, again, we're trying to do, here's what we found to this point. And again, we're still in the data gathering part of the story, so please, if I'm misspeaking, email me right away and tell me so we can get to the bottom of this. But here's what we found. There was a radio station, an FM station here on Central Penn's campus in the 80s, and from either the late 70s or early 80s to the mid to late 80s, around 79 to 85, from what we've been able to understand. From that point, the license was not renewed and was transferred to another institution in Pennsylvania. After that, what happened was the college created WARP 640 AM radio. The studio was actually located in the underground where our athletic director's office is. And so that was before the remodeling of the underground. That was where some of the studio space was. So those are some of the things that we found. Beyond that, we managed to find a few people who were part of this radio station and worked there and had classes and experiences there. So that's really what we're going to talk with Craig about today is WARP 640 AM. Craig, I guess the best place to start off with was what brought you to Central Penn?
When I I graduated high school and did not know what I wanted to do with my life, like a lot of people, I think. And I just kind of took a year off from school and worked, but I've always had a love of music and always listened to the radio. Back then, we didn't have streaming services. I didn't even have cable TV. So I had limited entertainment sources. But the one thing I always did from the time I was a little kid until now was listen to the radio. And I thought, I remember working at my job that I didn't care for, thinking, this isn't what I want to do. And I thought, I think I'd like to try to make it on the radio. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Where do I go? And so I did have a friend at the time, and I think and knew a couple of people from high school that came to Central Penn in other classes or curriculums. But I knew they had a mass media program, and I really wasn't interested too much in anything other than the radio part. So I decided I came up here for a visit, spoke with some people that were involved in the mass media program, and I was like, I just felt really comfortable and saw the radio station at the time. It was like, wow, this is really cool. This is a cool radio station, and it's when I think back now as we are talking about this, it was so tiny. And
was it bigger than our studio or smaller?
It was smaller than where we are now.
And just for those of you who've never been in the studio, it's not a bad size, but it's not big by any stretch of the imagination.
So you have a table here that seats 4 people, and I'm guessing two people could fit in this room from what I remember. And it's almost like if you ever go to a hearing place where you go get your hearing checked, they put you in a small booth sound. It's really, that was very similar to what that room was like. There was a window on the outside. And I think we had an on-air button, little light, so when you went on air, people knew that not to be loud and talk.
I need
and
to get one of those for
Yeah.
outside the
That'd be
door,
really
so
nice.
random people just don't walk in while I'm recording.
Yeah, that's what I would like to have that in my office now, and then when nobody would come
They
in.
have to make those.
It's like the
that-
stamp of approval.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome. Well, so you came here to Central Penn, and you said that when you first came up here, you saw the radio station. So tell me, what was your first memory of either being on the radio, or what was the first time you're like, wow, I'm actually doing this. I'm actually doing my own show on WARP 640 AM.
We had, as part of the curriculum, a class that we had to take. It was Radio 101 or something. I don't remember. But I remember we had an instructor that kind of just taught us. We didn't just start off with a radio show. We had to learn the equipment, and we're given some guidance. And I had to learn things like, how to cue up a record, because we had record players, and we also had cassette tapes and other things. And you really had to learn all that stuff, ahead of time, which I remember probably spending a couple weeks doing that. But all of us that were in the program were like, I just want to be on the radio. But it's important to learn these things before you just jump on.
Absolutely.
But so I remember, spending all this time doing all these chores and learning things that I'm like, oh, I just want to get on. But I do remember, I know the value, and at the time too knew that it was important to learn this stuff. But anyway, I do remember my very first radio show, and in fact, I have a cassette recording of it.
I've got to hear this.
No, you don't. I played it last night, listening to a little bit. I'm like, oh I can't believe that. It was so bad.
So I have recordings of all of my shows on tape, and I'll say that definitely later I got better, but I will tell you a funny story that, and of course we're here to talk about you and the history, but I relate to that story so well. The first radio show I ever had, I cursed on it, and I thought my radio career was over, right? I thought that the GM was going to have heard, and obviously that's like the last thing you want to do on your first show, and it was just, I didn't even think about it. And so no one heard, fortunately, and so I talked to one of my professors. I said, listen, how can I go through a show and make sure that what I'm saying is professional? Like, that was one of the things that I needed to learn, was just how to go into a podcast or how to go into a radio show with the mindset that what I'm saying is going to reflect well on the station. And you know what his advice was? Just act like you're talking to your grandma. Best advice I ever got in my broadcasting career, because never again did I ever anything come out of my mouth on the air, including today, that I regret in any way.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Because trust me, my grandma is still kicking at 93. I would never say anything like that, because even at 41 years old, she would still wash my mouth out with soap.
Yeah.
So okay, so you go ahead.
So let me just say that I still am this way. I like to prepare for everything I do. And for this very first radio show, I did prepare. I knew the songs I was going to play. I had them all ready to go. I knew that I wanted to use the phone, so we had a phone in the booth that had a little red light on it. I remember that, because you didn't want the phone ringing if someone were to call. So if there was a call, it would just light up, and you knew that. And I don't remember. I think it may have been patched into the audio board. So I did arrange for some other students I was friends with to call into the show to make it appear that somebody was listening, and like, oh my goodness, we have our first caller, and it was all planned, But we did that, and I played a lot of songs, and just really didn't talk that much, because I was really nervous, even though knowing that there wasn't going to be a lot of people listening. But it was something new to me, and it was out of my comfort zone. And I am not an extrovert. I like to kind of keep to myself. I'm not the radio DJ that I wanted to be, I think, And so it was a challenge for me to do that and get on the air. And that's kind of what I've learned throughout my whole adult life now, is trying to do things that I'm uncomfortable with. And that was, when I think about it, that may have been one of the reasons why I did want to come here and do that program is because it was not what I was comfortable with, and I have found over the years doing things that I'm not made for this, but it's just challenged me.
One of the things that I always talk about, so not only with the Nightly News Media Club, not only are we highly, highly, highly encouraged for our communication students, but we also are open to other students. In fact, we had a previous president of our organization that was an accounting major. And I asked him, his name was Parker. Parker, if you're out there listening, I'm saying hello. But I asked him on his final podcast, I said, now, why did you, wanting to get into accounting, why were you so interested in being on the podcast and writing for us? And he said, to your point, he said when he came here, he was a very, very shy person, and just being on the show helped him kind of break out of that shell, become more personable, and like, that is something that still resonated with me. And Dylan, I don't know if, obviously you've always been very outgoing, but have you seen that too? I mean, this is your last term. I mean, I guess this is probably your last podcast here with us, although I'm going to have you back for the film series next term. But do you see that? Like, have you noticed that in terms of yourself of being on these podcasts, maybe helping you to grasp this aspect of communication?
Like becoming a little more outgoing
Yeah.
each time? Yeah, I would definitely say every experience like this that I've had in my young adult life / teen life has really progressed me. I was in Boy Scouts, and that's the first time I think that I noticed that I was becoming more outgoing was when I became a leader of the troop, the scout leader of the troop, and the SPL, the senior patrol leader. And basically what they do is they, other than the adult leaders, they organize everything for each meeting. And they have to talk about stuff every day, or that we have a meeting. And that was the first time that I experienced that build up, and it has shown in things like this as well.
Absolutely. You've been a wonderful addition. And it's so sad, Craig, because Dylan's one of the most wonderful people we've ever had in the club, and he's graduating. You know, easy come, easy go, I guess. But, well, Craig, I want to get back into part of this. So you'd mentioned that the shows that you were on were part of the radio broadcasting class, and you'd mentioned a gentleman named Barry Fox, who was a local DJ at the time. Tell me a little bit more about your experience with Barry and maybe how he maybe mentored you through this process.
He was a mentor, and I remember a number of years ago seeing his obituary in the newspaper, and I had kind of forgotten about him, but it impacted me because sometimes we forget about those people who do play a part in our lives that we don't really realize it. But he taught me a lot, and I think I got it, what he was saying, and he talked a lot about in his classes the importance of preparation, the importance of enunciating and speak. And he had this voice, and I think he was a smoker, and he had the
Really gravelly.
It was just really deep.
The
and
epic trailer voice.
Yeah. So when you heard him talk, it was just like it felt all was calm with the world. You know, it was just this beautiful, low, calming voice, and he talked like that all the time. You know, it wasn't just his radio voice. So I kind of just like that stuck with me. But he would have us do projects, and we'd have to do homework, and he really taught me. And I'll speak for everybody else that was in the classes too, that, you know, every piece of what a radio person does, which is all great, but I think the one thing that he did teach me was that it wasn't all about just being an on-air voice. There's a lot more to radio. There's a lot more to just this mass media world in general, which to me, I know we're talking about the radio station, but that was just a stepping stone for where I went with the rest of my life. And that was kind of like the start, I think, of me becoming who I am. And, you know, we're talking about kind of getting out of your shell. And, well, when I got here, I didn't know anybody, of course, and I didn't really do much. But being involved in the radio station, you know, he would say, okay, you have to go out and interview somebody, do a commercial or something. And so I would be the guy running around campus with my little recorder interviewing people, And I think over time, then that kind of transferred into the video stuff that I would do. So I was always the guy on campus documenting all this stuff. And we didn't really have that. And I think just people that helped me again get out of my shell and shape who I am.
One of the things you mentioned in sort of the pre-show meeting that we had was some memories that you had of like remote broadcasts and things like that. Share a little bit of that with us, just so we can get in the time machine and go back 30 years to what it was like here at Central Penn.
So back then we did not have any of the technology that we have now, of course, and I would carry a little handheld cassette recorder, and one of my ideas was, and I think we had to record a show as part of our projects that we had to do that was graded, and I didn't want it to just be here's Bon Jovi coming up, and that's kind of, so I wanted some other things that. And one of the ideas was to have a remote broadcast, but we did not have any type of remote capabilities. So I would...
It's not like someone could call in on their cell phone.
No, there weren't any cell
1992.
phones. Yeah, there was nothing. So I would go out and we'd have an event, maybe like craft show or pool party or something. And I would go and interview people and made up a topic, I don't really know what, and then they would respond. And then I would go back to the radio booth, and when I would interview these people, I'd say, "Hey, this is," and I have a name, I don't remember, Joe, whatever. I'm on remote at Central Penn, and then just recorded all that. But then I'd come back to my show and say, "Okay, we're gonna go to Joe now, who's on remote at Central Penn," and just play the recording. And of course, it sounded fake and terrible, but again, what it taught me is if I wanted to do something, have a remote. We didn't have the capability, so I solved that problem of finding another way to do it. There were times when the equipment wasn't working. That's common everywhere in every job.
It happens here all the time.
Exactly. And I remember one time the phone didn't work, being fed in through the audio board. So I held the receiver up to the microphone, and that's how I communicated with somebody that was calling in. And from what I remember, a lot of things didn't work, to be honest with you. But that was the fun part of it. And it was that, again, I had to find a solution. I'm not going to, if I'm going to be on the air, I'm going to be on the air. I'm not going to quit, It really kind of helped my problem-solving skills over the years.
We have about 6 minutes left on this show, so I want to get to Dylan, and I know that, Dylan, you're working on this piece. What are some of the questions you might be able to ask Craig that he might be able to fill in some gaps here with some of the things that you've come up with to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest questions, or soft controversies, if you will, so far in my studying and research has been the fact that I know you said that you came in 90 to 92, and this is a while before I think that this happened, but did you ever hear about, when you were a part of this program, the transition between the potential two different radio stations that existed?
I had no knowledge of the FM station when you were referring to that earlier. So when I came in, it was all about the WARP, and even just a year or two prior to me coming in, I think was like at the height of the popularity of the radio station. In fact, There were a couple of two guys, I think, that had a radio station or show that also formed a relationship with some professional DJs at WTPA, which still exists. And I think they may have been on their show broadcasting from WARP, which was a huge thing back then. But I do not have any recollection of the FM station.
That's really interesting that no one mentioned that, because when was it that the other one we researched went down? Was it the late 80s?
Mid 80s. I want to say that from everything that I've understood, WARP started in, I believe, 87 or 88. So the ARP it seemed only on the air for about 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was sort of when you were in. But you also mentioned, Craig, that you believe that toward the end of your tenure here, the radio station had started to lose some steam. And then that's really where we were in a 30-year hole of information here. So let me ask you, I have two final questions for you. if you had to remember and reminisce about one specific, whether it was show or experience that you had as part of the radio station, can you maybe dig up some of those memories and share that with us?
I don't remember what number show this was. I never kept track of that, but I do remember one night, and our shows were late at night, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and we would have. I think my roommate at the time, he was part of the show, never talked, but it was called the Mike and Craig Show. And I don't know if he ever talked at all. But anyway.
It's got a good ring to it.
Yeah, yeah. And we would have some of our friends that lived in our apartment building come and hang out at the station. And it was almost like I always wanted to be in a band, like a rock band, and have people chanting my name or like I'm there to see you. Well, these people would sit out in the little lobby area and listen to the show, and I was standing right inside that booth, and for a moment, a very short moment, I was popular, and it was like people are really here to. I mean, they're my friends, and but they're really here to support me and listen, and they are listening, and it was. I think I'll always remember that experience as it just made me feel really good and confident, gave me some confidence and inspired me to, keep doing this. Even though, I think we kind of all could see where this was headed. It was coming near the end of this program, which I don't know how long it lasted after that.
It couldn't have been much longer because
Yeah.
we haven't found anyone that's really been here post 92 that can speak about the station. Now, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but
Yeah.
that's sort of where we're at. I have one final question for you, and it really just has to do with not only where you are today, and you're welcome to describe that, but how did this experience, not only just at Central Penn, but being on WARP, make you who you are today, or what influence did it have on the rest of your career?
I think for the most part, it really helped me learn how to problem solve, got me out of my comfort zone, made me do things that I never thought I could do or would do or wanted to do, and just set me on the path of who I am and who I became as a person. I think college life, you become somebody, especially after you get out of high school and you go to college, and we all hear people's college stories, and mine aren't much different, but it really sticks with me, the experiences I had as a result of being the radio guy and going around and having to talk to people. I'd interview instructors too, and they didn't know who I was, and they probably still be like, I don't remember that guy at all. But I talked to them and I interviewed them. As I think back throughout my professional life, I always come back to where it all began for me. Even though I'm doing nothing in the field, I'm still applying some of the things that I've learned in my current job, and even with my love of music and my love of radio. And I still listen to mostly Pandora, those sorts of things. Not so much local radio anymore, but I still like to tinker with editing audio files and putting things together.
Hey, do you need a job? Because I always can use someone to edit audio for me.
Yeah, so I still do that, and I've been doing that since I was a little kid.
Give a plug for, if you don't want to talk about where you work, that's perfectly fine. But you're also in the process of you've already started your own business, but you're in a process of really taking that to the next level. Do you just want to give a shout out to what you've really been up to recently?
Sure. Yeah, I will talk. Just mention my professional career too, if that's okay.
Absolutely, sure.
I work for an association here, very very close to the school. It didn't go very far. It's called the Pennsylvania Municipal Authorities Association, and we do a lot of things with in the local government world. Anyway, my job is I'm the IT guy, I'm the communications guy. I'm a lot of different people, do a lot of different things. And a lot of what I've learned and did at the school in my younger days, I'm still doing, or I've come back to be doing. But my passion in life is beer. I love beer, and I love brewing beer. And one of my goals is to open a small brewery here in the Harrisburg area. And I've been doing I go to events, pouring events, try to get my name out there and more importantly, my beer out there for people to try. Hopefully within the next year, maybe that would be my goal, is to open up a place, very small again. But it's my passion. And just like coming to Central Penn many years ago, no, I didn't get into radio, but that's what I wanted to do at the time. And I would have regretted not trying. And so that's how I've kind of approached everything in my life. And the same thing with beer. I'm going to try to do this. And if it doesn't happen, at least I tried.
Absolutely.
And it was like that with me in high school with pole vaulting. I was the worst pole vaulter ever, but at least I tried. And I gave it my best shot.
Absolutely. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being here today. It's so wonderful that you took the time out of your busy schedule to come down here to Central Penn. And you said it had been the first time you'd been here for almost 30 years. So I appreciate you taking the time out. And man, I just thank you so much for spending the time to reminisce about old WARP 640 AM here in the underground of Central Penn College. So Craig, thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Dylan, A, thank you for working on this story. B, thank you for taking an interest in the history of our campus. You already did a wonderful piece about the Boyer House, and now you're working on the radio station. So, and thank you. And if this is the last time, at least until next term, thank you for doing everything that you've done with the Nightly News.
Absolutely. It's been an honor.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. For Craig Fahnestock, for Dylan Bowman, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.
Hi, I'm Shauna.
And I'm Denise.
And I'm Adrienne from the Pirate Life Podcast, and you're listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Arr!
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we are back. We just got done talking to Craig Fahnestock of WARP Radio here back in the 80s and early 90s. Today, we are actually going to be talking to another alumni of WARP Radio 640 AM here at Central Penn College, Dean Reigle. Dean, welcome to the show. Welcome back to campus. It's so wonderful that you took time out of your busy schedule to join us here.
Thank you. It's been great to see the campus again.
And we're also being joined still by Nightly News co-president Dylan Bowman. Dylan's actually working on the sort of the second part of his History Revisited series as far as taking a look back at the radio station. So Dylan, not only thank you for being here, but thank you for taking the initiative to kind of remember some of the history of the college.
Absolutely, Paul.
Well, I want to get right down to it. So, Dean, you were here from 88 to 90, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And so let's just start. What drew you to Central Penn College? Even before all the memories that you have, like when you think back, why did you end up here at Central Penn? What were some of the reasons and rationales that brought you here?
Well, when I was looking for a college, I was looking for some place that offered a media program. I wasn't sure I wanted a four-year college, so this was right up my alley, so to speak. I came here and fell in love with the campus. We moved in when the townhouses were brand new.
I thought that was so interesting. You actually showed me a picture, which I would love for you to email me.
Yep.
Of you standing outside during their college days outside of the townhouses next to your car. I'm like, this is crazy. It's like 30 years ago. And of course, it's something I walk by all the time.
Yep. I had, for the umpteenth dozen time, had locked my keys in my car. So my roommate and his clothes hanger were always nearby.
So, media was something that you were interested in. You know, when you were growing up, what was it about the media that enthralled you?
Radio. It was absolutely the local radio stars, the voice.
Which you have, clearly.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's what it was. I wasn't as fascinated with TV as star-wise as much as I was the whole radio. And back then, radio was big.
I'm going to tell you a funny story, and this is one that I haven't broken out on this podcast, which they're few and far between because of how many episodes we've done. I remember, and I'm the same as you, right? I grew up listening to Bruce Bond, Howard Stern,
yep.
You know, some of these, even Tony Kornheiser's been around forever. These are people who I idolize. And actually, here's what's super interesting. This isn't even the direction I'm going in. Bruce Bond, after he left the air, came back to TPA and then left TPA. I actually got to produce his show for the last year of his career. He created a podcast. He actually came here to Central Penn to do his podcast. So this is a person who I grew up literally idolizing, and I actually got to be his producer for his final year of audio through podcasting,
Wow.
which was really interesting. But I grew up with those people, Dean, and that was what was important to me too when I got into this. Like, it was all about the audio, and I'll never forget. I kind of got set up, friend of a friend, with a girl back in college, and I'll never forget the first time I met her. She had listened to me on the radio, right? She
Nice.
listened to my shows, and when I met her, she's like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't expect you would be so good looking considering you're on the radio." I guess that was sort of the going thing, is that, hey, if you're on the radio, it must be because you have a face for radio.
Yeah, that's
if you know what I
right.
mean. So Dean, you came here because you wanted to be involved with the media. Obviously, you were here, but when you first came here, again, we're trying to figure all of this out. There was an FM station here from the late 70s to the mid 80s, and for a variety of reasons that we're still trying to piece together, that station folded and WARP 640 AM was created. You were here right around the inception of that time, correct?
Yep.
Walk us through the thought process, maybe what it was like to get this station back off the ground and sort of resurrect the station. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, when we came in, the radio station wasn't a radio station, it was a closet. So Dave and I think it was, decided that we wanted to see if we could get the radio station back up and running, because he was also interested in radio, and the fact that we didn't have a radio representation was sort of disappointing to us. So we talked to Ron Ross, and whatever he did, whatever magic he performed, he got us the radio station back up and running. And we were, from what I can remember, we're going to go with one of two, WKRP, a hark back to one of my favorite TV shows, or WARP. And I think we probably thought we were going to get in trouble with using the WKRP, so we went with Warp because it just sounded great for college radio. So
Now, you'd mentioned a gentleman in there, Ron Ross, and he is a name that continues to, not only Craig previously talked about him, but you're also talking about him too. Who was Ron Ross?
Ron Ross was our head of mass media. He was the man who was in charge of us, and the poor guy. But he was a great guy. He got the radio station up and running for us. We had no idea what we needed to do. He took care of everything for us. He actually got us to the College Broadcasters Conference.
Hold that thought, because I want to come back to that, but I don't want to skip too far ahead. So,
Okay.
so Ron was instrumental in getting WARP 640 AM off the ground. Do you remember what it was like the first time that you had the opportunity to actually go out over the airwaves? Do you remember that feeling that
Oh
you
yeah,
had?
it was nerve-wracking. I couldn't get over the nerves of being on the air and thinking there were actually people listening to my voice. But it was great. It felt like we had finally accomplished something. We got something going. Yeah, it was a good feeling.
I mean, I can tell just by looking, this is something that you still remember even, 30 plus years later as an important moment in your life.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I guess the question is, Dean, how this all came to be, and I don't know how much I explained about this with Craig. We found out about this maybe 6 to 8 months ago, and we sent out an appeal through our alumni contact list through mass media students. And Dean, you were one of the people who reached out to us, and now we're just really trying to figure out this history, and you're such an integral part of that. Did you ever think that somebody would have you on a podcast to talk about this station that existed so long ago and frankly has fallen away in people's memories?
Oh yeah, I absolutely knew it. No, I had no idea it was gonna happen. There's just no way.
You sound like you were a really big part of the mass media program and the radio station. And what I've come to realize as a person who loves history is that stories are the things that where history comes to life. So do you have any favorite memories perhaps of being on the mass media program and in the radio?
Yeah, there's lots, but one of my favorite is I go back to the trip we made. It was just too much fun to go to another university.
Well, let's set this up.
No.
Let's talk about it.
There's lots of memories, but that's my favorite.
Now's the time. Okay, so one of the things that Dean was talking about previously is one of his most vivid memories of the college experience, especially with the radio station, was the
National College Broadcasters Conference.
Okay, so was when back in either the late 80s, early 90s, and around that time, the National Conference of Broadcasters was a conference was held at Brown University, and Ron Ross sponsored a trip for himself and some of the mass media students to be a part of this conference. So tell us a little bit about how that came to be, and tell us what you remember about that experience.
Well, I don't remember who found it, Dave or I, but one of us found out about a National College Broadcasters Conference, and we wanted to go. We thought, well, we're a college, we should represent. And really, we just wanted to get out and go to something like that at Brown University.
Well, that's part of going to the conferences,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's part of but the experience is an important piece of it.
Yeah, but once again, Ron worked his magic and got approval for himself and 2 students, and Dave and I were the 2 students, and we got to go, and it was fantastic. We were right in the heart of Brown University with college broadcasters and media students from across the country. It was great. I really couldn't tell you any of the classes or any of the things we went to, but had the best pizza in the world there.
I remember you telling that story. But I wonder, too, like, all of that speaks to what we're trying to unearth here, Dean, is that I think personally, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but please chime in, for us as the Nightly News to have started literally from nothing to where we have come today and what we've managed to do in a relatively short period of time. Nightly News started in 2015. We're going into our 8th year, is really quite amazing.
Absolutely.
It bothers me, though, that we don't have more of this history preserved here. And that's the title of your Boyer House piece. And I wonder if this can sort of be history preserved part 2, because that's essentially what you're doing here, Dylan. So, like, I guess the biggest question that I have is, I want to preserve this history. I want to preserve whatever history that we can while we can. But Dylan, what is it about this particular topic that has gravitated to you to a project that essentially you're working on for several months?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I'm huge on history. Basically, it's kind of strange because most people that I know, they either have no love of history, they don't want to, they're like, okay, it doesn't really matter to me. It's old dusty books and stuff like that. Or they have a particular love of like local history or world history or something of that nature. For the most part, I'm like across the board, like down to college-based history stuff, hearing those stories of the radio and everything really is interesting to me, the whole way up to national and world history and whatever. But just being able to uncover some of that, like you said, that's something that, again, we knew nothing about up to this point, and then being able to uncover that, dust off those old books and say, wow, this is something we haven't seen for a long time is really amazing.
I had the opportunity last week. There was an event at the Cumberland County Historical Society called A Night with Babe. I'm a huge baseball fan, and it was all about Babe Ruth. And the folks, the curator and the assistant curator of the Babe Ruth Museum in Baltimore came up to do this program. And he said something that really, I don't know how to put it into words. It really moved me as a baseball fan. He held up a ball and he said, without the story, this is a ball. This is a ball that's worth $5.
Absolutely.
But because we know what the significance of this ball is, well, here it was his 700th home run ball. And because of the story. Now, in his case, he was talking about creating value for a piece of memorabilia. But what he was really getting at is if you don't keep these stories going and that go along with the things that we value and cherish in our lives, that history can be lost. And that was so poignant to me that, like, I can't even put... I was moved, when he said that. And he also gave another tip. If you have anything that you value and cherish in terms of possessions, that you should always write the information about what that is and provide that provenance to it, especially if it's a family heirloom, that you can pass that story on. Because, again, if it's a story that you have, it goes away with you. And unfortunately, that's what's happened here, right? The institutional knowledge of a station from the late 70s to the early 90s, we don't have anybody that works here anymore that would even have any memory of it. And so it's people like you, Dean, and Craig earlier today that have really made a huge impact on what we're trying to accomplish here. Dylan, I want to go back to that real quick. One of the most interesting things that I ever remember hearing from you, and it's something we don't talk about much anymore, you are involved with the local historical society, correct?
Right, the Halifax Area Historical
Now,
Society.
how did you get, and you said you've been doing that since you were, what, 15 or 14?
No, it was okay. So when I did my Eagle Scout project, my beneficiary was the Halifax Area Historical Society. I renovated an 1800s era one-room schoolhouse locally that was pretty dilapidated at that point. They were trying to get their resources to pull together, try to build it back up, but a lot of the people working on it were pretty old or getting older because it was a decades upon project.
Sure.
And at that point, they kind of just put it on the back burner because there were no people that were helping out. And when it finally came time for me to do my Eagle Scout project, I said, hey, I want to finish this for you, turn it into a local museum, whatever. And as a thank you, they said, after it was all said and done, years later, they said, I think I was 18 at the time, maybe 19. No, it was 18. And they said, hey, as a thank you, we would like to offer you a position on the board. And I'm the youngest person in the history of the board to be on there.
So
Nice.
fantastic. Well, Dylan, I mean, it was from there that we kind of got the ball rolling with some of these pieces that you've done. Obviously, you've worked on our film series, but the Boyer House story that you did, the story that you're currently working on that we're going to release before the end of the term, it's just such an important piece of this. Well, let's flash back to your show, Dean. What were some of the tunes that you played? Because obviously the WARP was a music station. So tell me a little bit more about not only which kind of music you played, but maybe what kind of music, if we just tuned in at a random time, we might hear.
Well, at a random time, you could hear anything from, at that time, also classic rock. There was one student who wasn't actually a media student, but he had a great classic rock record collection. So he had his hour. I'm pretty sure, I think Dave had alternative music, would have been college music at that time. And I had a different taste at that time. I was heavily into the Christian rock scene. And so I played bands like White Stripe, Resurrection Band. Boy, this is really digging names out of the back of my head. And, well, I know the one big popular band at that time was Stryper. So I would play music like that, and then I also interned at a radio station in Lancaster, which I did the same kind of music. So, yeah, it was just, it ran the gamut. Whatever that student decided was their favorite genre of music, that's what they played.
Did you ever have the opportunity to record any of your old programs?
No.
One of the things that I am so happy that I did in my life, Dylan, I have every radio show I ever did in college on
That's
cassette.
awesome.
Nice.
Every one of them. And my wife a couple of times like, what are you going to do with these old tapes? You don't even have a tape player. I'm like, don't ever touch my tapes. You ever do it? But I have actually digitized
That's good,
the
yeah.
good
Nice.
stuff. Like,
Yeah.
it would take me months to digitize every tape, but I've got the really, really like memorable episodes that I still remember to this day. And that's what's really cool about all of this too, is I'm seeing photos. Craig shared with us some VHS tapes, that we're going to get digitized. I mean, this is the stuff that is so important, not only to me and Dylan, but it speaks to who we are as a group, as a nightly news media club. And it's important for us to understand the history of the people who came before us and frankly paved the way for us. So I know in some weird way, you're probably like, why do these people care about an old closet? But it's not. It's about so much more than that, Dean. It's about, look, the bottom line is you went to Professor Ross and said, we need an outlet to get experience, to try to fulfill goals and dreams that we have. That exact same thing happened here at Central Penn College. We had a group of 5 students, and I can still remember each and every one of them. Nightly News Hall of Famer Christine Fusselman, Nick Schenkel, Candace Livingston, and there was a host of others, and I apologize if you're listening and I didn't mention you, that came to us and they said, we want an outlet. Now, again, we started with an online newspaper, and look at what's happened in such a short period of time. And it just goes to show you that if the students out there that are listening, if you see an area where you think that we're missing something, it is so easy for us to start student clubs. And look at what happened. I mean, you're talking about a group of young people who went to a professor, said, we want a radio station. And, Professor Ross at the time put time and effort and energy to get the license, take you guys to this conference. And we're talking about it over 30 years later.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's amazing.
It's frankly, I'm not really sure how to put into words what this afternoon that you're spending with us really is going to mean in the long term of our not even so much Central Penn, but the Nightly News Media Club. And the future that it holds for us and how important this is to us. So any other memories of being, even if it's not necessarily a station, just being here on campus and things that you remember?
Yeah, there was one thing that I thought of that you asked in the beginning that drew me to this campus, and it's one thing I don't think exists here anymore. But there was a dress code. There was a business dress code. And there was something about walking into these doors in a suit and tie. You felt it. You felt like you were ready for business school. And I think that's what prompted us to get the radio. We were learning things. We were getting an education in media, and we were expected to look like professionals. So we wanted to do the jobs that we were learning. And for me and for Dave and for others in our class, radio was what we wanted. So we felt that's something we needed. But yeah, the whole experience of being here was something that I'll not forget.
What's really interesting, Dean, that you mentioned that. Okay, so I was here while the dress code was still in place. So I started here in 2013, and I believe the dress code left in 14 or 15.
Really? It was that soon?
Yes.
Wow. I thought it was the 90s, perhaps.
So my first 2 years, at least my first 2 years, possibly 3, I don't remember off the top of my head, we actually had a student. We just published, Christine, who helped start the club, wrote a story back in 2015 about this, and we actually just published it again on the site, so you have to check that out. But it was just the president at the time just thought that was just a different direction that we wanted to go in.
Oh, yeah.
But, and here's a huge but, that is probably the most common thing that I hear from people who have come back to campus for a while that honestly that they remembered. And you would think, people in today's day and age, they don't want that. I think there still is a market for that. I do. And of course, I'm not questioning anything the institution's doing, but it's a very common sentiment from alumni that come back.
It's a different era. I mean, I understand when it was taken away because the atmosphere of the business world changed. The Steve Jobs had come in, the big tech companies in California with a more relaxed so it was seen as something that was old and not something that was new and fresh. So I completely understand. I mean, we complained about it. We hated it. But looking back, it gave you a whole different attitude.
Absolutely, 100%. Yep. So, Dean, the one thing that I did want to ask you is your experience here at Central Penn did open some doors for you in the media. I know that ultimately both you and Craig agreed that while you came here for mass media, it ultimately and long-term in your career didn't necessarily go that way. But you did work for other radio stations after you left here. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, while I was here, I worked at a local station that's still running in my town, WCHX. I worked there over the weekends. I would live here on campus during the week and then go home on the weekends, wash my clothes on my parents' place, and go work at the radio station. And that was overnight cans. It did 50s and 60s reel-to-reel shows, and I would put in the weather and the letter call signs at the top of the hour and stuff. And then I also worked at and then interned while I was here in my last semester of Central Penn, a radio station in Lancaster. Do not remember the call letters, but they also, it was a Christian radio station, and I did a Christian metal show there on Sundays, which, just boggles my mind to think about.
We were talking, we grabbed a little lunch earlier, and we were talking a little bit about this. What saddens me to no end, and to be honest, I guess I was lucky that I came to this realization pretty early. So my goal, we're talking 99 I graduated 03. My goal was to be on air, right? That was all I wanted to do. obviously, as you know, and it started well before '03, but probably even the mid-'90s is when you get a lot of stuff voice tracked. You get a lot of syndication. You get a lot of all types of different things that are happening in the radio that just takes away opportunities for people. And this is what's frustrating, okay, because you're saying you're working an overnight shift. Overnight shifts don't exist anymore.
No.
If Dylan wanted to be on the radio right now, he wouldn't really even have an outlet to do that. They're not even doing on-air internships anymore. If you want to intern at a radio station, you're working in sales or promotions. And so, fortunately, early enough, I realized that radio wasn't necessarily, traditional radio, let's say, wasn't necessarily going to be my path. But gosh, that's what just devastates me about the radio industry, that it's all, we're talking commercial radio here, it's all syndicated, it's all voice tracked. Even the stuff that sounds live isn't live, it's recorded. And I'll tell you what, you should see the look on people's faces when I tell them, hey, that radio show you're listening to, it's not live. It's not live at all. It's recorded. Even like Nipsey on 105.7, right? That they go in, they record the whole show, and then they do other stuff while the show's still running. It's just how it is today, and that's fine. And I don't want to be an old curmudgeon and be like, no, you shouldn't do that. But what has happened to the industry is it basically cannibalized itself because you're not bringing in new talent. There's no new talent coming in because there's no opportunity for them to get on the air. One of our dear club members, Brian Cristiano, works for iHeart, and all this kid wants to do in the world is be on the air, and he's a sales rep. Now, he has gotten to be on the air. He does a lot with sports, which is great, and he's filled in a few times, so he is working his foot in the door. But you're talking about a person who is so committed to being in radio that he's basically worked a couple of years in sales just to get that opportunity. So by trying to make it more cost efficient, what they're doing is cannibalizing their entire industry.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. When I grew up at WCHX, the station I worked at, there was one on-air personality there that was one of the last great 50s style personalities, and he just had the smooth 50s voice.
You do too, by the way.
It's not there anymore. The only way you're going to be an on-air personality in radio is you've got to have some kind of really big hook. You've got to reach syndication. That's it. The day of the on-air personality becoming famous, it just doesn't happen anymore. Now, CHX, they still have local personalities on air, but it's still not the same. The way I see it, podcasting is where the next step is for anybody who wants to get into the broadcasting field, use their voice. Podcast is the way.
I fully agree. And again, we kind of missed radio in terms of when we had people who were interested in broadcast, we never even looked at trying to get an over-the-air station. We went right to podcast studio, and I actually think we were one of the earlier adopters, at least collegiately, early adopters in just fostering a podcast on demand as opposed to an over-the-air station, because there's just a much lower barrier to entry than to try to get a signal and go through the FCC. We don't need any of that to do what we're doing here, and it just made it so much easier. But gosh, I could sit here and talk with you all day, Dean, but unfortunately our time is coming to a close here. I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about things that you're currently doing now in media. Certainly not necessarily over the air, but you told me earlier you're working on a couple of projects here, and I want you to be able to give out that information so our viewers or our listeners can keep up with you.
Okay, well, during the pandemic brought a lot of us different hobbies and habits that we didn't know we had or wanted to develop before. I had started a collection of little books called Little Blue Books. They were put out in the early part of the last century, 19-teens to 1920s, 30s, and I decided I was going to read these things, so I have a YouTube channel called Reading Little Blue Books, and that's what I do. I get on there, and it's not professional, it's not snazzy. It's just me reading a book.
But your voice is awesome.
I was going to say, if you like my voice, I'll put you to sleep.
But that's
Listen
the
to my
thing.
book.
You're saying it's not professional, but you've worked at 3 different radio stations. You've got a history of broadcast. I mean, don't downplay yourself.
Well,
right?
It's. But yeah, I do that, and then I have a not a YouTube. I have a TikTok and an Instagram, and I go by the name of Dean Schunkweiler. SHUNKWILER. And you can find me under that handle. I do lives. I used to do them on a daily basis on TikTok, and then that just got to be monotonous. But I am currently reading from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy live every Tuesday and Wednesday night. So I'll do it tonight. I did it last night, and then I'll do it tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
That is so cool. I love this. And I'll tell you what, just to sort of go out on this note, Dean, it's clear that the audio medium itself has not gone away. I mean, podcasting has exploded over the past half decade. And that's one of the things that, like, I can actually bring to the table for my students now. Yes, when you ask students, how often are you listening to the radio? Of course, the radio industry will tell you like 94% of people listen to the radio weekly. Well, if you count it's on the background in a store somewhere, sure. But what I do still think that over-the-air radio still has a function in our society. But in terms of people that are coming to school right now that are 18 to 22 years old, they don't want to hear about the radio.
No.
They want to know how to make a podcast.
Yep.
Guess what? It's the same thing that we were doing 20 years ago.
Same skill set.
Except it's on demand, and people, if they miss it, they can listen anytime. And so, again, it's just that evolution of this audio medium that has changed so much. And so, podcasting is such an important piece of the future of the audio medium, if you will. And that's why I love that you're doing these types of things to capitalize on skills that you learned years ago.
Oh yeah, I still love to do it. I mean, a skill I picked up here was reading out loud. You have to read out loud to understand if you can say the words, pronounce it. You've got to, and I still do that. I'll sit and read the newspaper, and I read out loud. I know my neighbor probably thinks I'm crazy because he hears me reading all the time out loud.
Well, Dylan, I can remember one of the most difficult assignments we have. We have a class called Writing for Broadcast, where you write scripts,
Yep.
You write commercials,
Yeah, I
things
think
like
I know
that.
where you're going with this.
The hardest assignment that any student has in this program is when they have to write a script and then read it in front of the camera.
Yep.
People are like, oh, I can read. I'm like, it's not about if you can read. I'm sure you're in college.
Right.
I'm sure you can read.
Yep.
But it's, can you read and speak at the same time, right?
Yep.
So, but gosh, Dean, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to spend it with us and help us kind of remember WARP 640 AM radio here at Central Penn.
No, thank you. It's been great going down this memory lane.
No problem at all. And Dylan, again, not only thank you for being here today, but thank you for taking the initiative on this project. And we are looking forward so soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, to get this story out to everyone and hope everybody can enjoy this history as much as you and I have of sort of digging it up.
Absolutely, so do I.
Well, all right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. Special thanks go out to Dean Reigle, former WARP 640 AM DJ, and Dylan Bowman, our co-president of the Nightly News Media Club. So again, thank you so much to those two for being here. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.